everyone, today we are going to be making these really pretty bubble bracelets. Now normally when I make these bracelets, I make each bracelet one color. So that means I have to find 4 different sizes of beads that are the same color and finish. And I really love the look of that because it really makes the texture of the beads the star of the show. But today I am going to be making each of the different sizes of beads a different color so that it's easier for you to see when I'm switching between sizes. So I've got a 1.5mm bead in this purple color here, a 2mm bead in this royal blue color, a 3mm bead in this cyan color, and then a 4mm bead in this baby blue. We're also going to need a 12mm lobster clasp, a wire guard, a 4mm jump ring, and a 1-inch extension chain. I'm also going to be using my 6-pound Fireline crystal for this design today. And I have about 5.5 to 6 feet of it threaded onto my big eye needle. I'm also going to be using a thread zapper, a pair of needle nose pliers, and my handy dandy jump ring opener. You do have to put a lot of tension on your thread for this design, so if I'm making multiple bracelets in a row, I like to use this little finger sleeve that I made so that it's not slicing through my finger. But if you're just making one bracelet, it's not a big deal, and I do end up taking it off. I've chosen a matte black Delica bead to be my stop bead today so that it stands out. I'm going to pull it down until there's just a couple inches for a tail, and then I'm going to go back through the bead 2 more times in the same direction to make sure it's nice and secure. And for my first row, I'm going to pick up 6 1.5mm beads and pull them down to my stop bead. Then I'm going to pick up another 1.5mm bead and start peyote stitching them on. So I'm going to skip the last bead and go into the next bead. Then I'm going to peyote stitch on another 1.5mm bead by skipping 1 bead and going into the next bead. And then I'm going to do that a 3rd time, so for this row we've stitched on 3 1.5mm beads. And since this is even peyote, I don't need to do a turnaround, I can just get straight to stitching on my next row of 3 1.5mm beads. Now I'm actually going to work my way back through the first row towards the 3rd bead in. And this is where I'm going to stitch on my lobster clasp. I'm going to skip a bead and go into the next bead, and then I'm going to make a little circle around the beads to make my way back through the lobster clasp a 2nd time. Then we're going to make our way back up to the top right hand bead. Now we are ready to start stitching on our next row, and I'm going to be switching to the 2mm beads for this row. So I'm just going to be stitching on 3 individual 2mm beads with peyote stitch. And then we're going to stitch on another row of 2mm beads. And now I will switch to a row of my 3mm beads. Now I will do a second row of 3mm beads. And then finally I will switch to doing a row of my 4mm beads. And you can see as we're getting bigger and bigger, the shape is starting to fan out a little bit. I'm going to do a second row of 4mm beads. And now here is where we start to decrease the size of the beads, and this is when we're going to have to start putting a lot more tension on our thread. So I'm switching back to the 3mm beads, and I'm going to go 2 rows of that. And now is the point where I like to start squishing the sides together to give it that bubbled appearance while I cinch the thread really tightly. And it is not going to stay that way by itself until you start putting on the smaller beads, so you just have to keep nice even tension on it to keep it bubbled up like that. Now I'm going to do 2 rows of my 2mm beads. And now you can see it's starting to be able to hold that shape by itself without you putting tension on it. And now I'm going to switch to doing 4 rows of my 1.5mm beads. And now that we've put on a couple rows of the 1.5mm, you can see that it'll hold its shape just fine, and you don't need to put any tension on it at all. And now that you've finished all 4 rows of your 1.5mm beads, we're ready to start making another bubble. So I'm going to switch back to my 2mm beads and do 2 rows of that. And just like the last bubble, we're going to graduate after that to our 3mm beads and do 2 rows of those. And then we will do 2 rows of our 4mm beads before we start to decrease again. 2 rows of 3mm beads again, 2 rows of 2mm beads again, and then start over again with the 4 rows of 1mm beads. So here's what it looks like after I've added a 3rd bubble. And now here it is after I've added a 4th bubble. And then we'll just keep repeating this pattern until we have the bracelet length that we desire. And I decided that 9 total bubbles of this bracelet was a good length for me, and you may have to add more or less depending on the size of your measurements for your bracelet. So to finish this bracelet off, I'm just going to add another 4 rows of my 1.5mm beads, and then I will be adding a wire guard to this side of the bracelet. So I'm going to thread back through my beads over to the 2nd bead from the left, and that's where I'm going to put on my wire guard. So I'm going to go up one leg of the wire guard and down the other leg. And then I'm going to go into the middle bead from the last row. And I'm going to go in a circle around the wire guard at least one more time just to make sure it's really secure. Now I'm going to weave through my 1.5mm beads, changing directions and making at least 2 full circles so that when I cut off the excess length of thread, my wire guard is not going to come loose. Now I'm going to burn the excess thread off with my thread zapper, and I'm going to take the stop bead off of the other side and finish it off the same way. Now all we have to do is open up our 4mm jump ring, slide our wire guard on there and our extension chain, and then close it right back up. And there you have your pretty little bubble bracelet. And you can see on this one that we've just freshly made that the bubbles are pretty high and tight, but they do end up relaxing a little bit over time. So this red one has been worn quite a bit, and you can see it's a little looser, a little more flexible, and the bubbles aren't as tall. And you can also use this same technique to make things like earrings, necklaces, and rings as well. So I would definitely give that a shot too. I've basically made one in every color that I have available. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this tutorial and would like to see more like it, please be sure to throw me a morsel of a subscribe, a crumb of a like, or a tasty tidbit of a comment. And if you really want to support this channel, you can go to Xerelia.com, where I list all the items that I feature on this channel. And I also have some patterns and bead kits on there too, so check it out. I will leave a link in the description for you. Okay, bye!